Don't fire the guy who holds the patents. This is my father's story. He had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or a doctorate. It had taken him many years to get, and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he had privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas before hitting on a new design which would solve all of those problems. The inner workings of those lockers' locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into, and 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed, and 3. It was, relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that said that if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. Dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent company's owner and chairman of the board passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company that my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think that they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans that my father had designed. Now, that's where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it, or licensing the patents, as any reputable company would have done, they ordered him to turn over all of his work, or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks, before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So, onto the revenge. There may be more to this, but I'm not entirely sure if it's just pro-revenge. It could border on nuclear based on what happened some years later, though I'm not certain that what later happened had anything to do with my father's actions. So after cleaning out his office and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company had fired him wasn't going to just make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that, though the company itself was relatively small, the owners had money and there was no way that he could fight them. However, a larger company could. So he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype that he'd made, explained how everything worked, and noted that, with this system, the company could revolutionize the way that lockers were both designed and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all the patents, both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tool and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their number one competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design, and there wasn't a dang thing the first company could do about it. They did try suing my father, claiming that he had stolen their intellectual property, but that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they'd never actually signed a contract with him, and there was no requirement that he turn over anything he had created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and the process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they'd been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it, only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. Put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they'd lost so much business, I wager it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, threaten the guy that holds the patents on something that they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. I was asked that, I don't know what the degree level was. Well, my father and I had a very difficult relationship. There are some very good few memories I have of him, and it wasn't until shortly before his death in 2007 from a stroke that I really started to connect with him. I resented him for most all of my life because he was more career-minded than anything. I figure we moved some 10 times in 20 years, and it greatly affected me. For a rather long period of time, I am ashamed to say, I hated my father and wanted nothing to do with him. So I must have ended up wealthy, huh? Well, no, not really. Any money that Dad earned off of his little endeavor was lost after an incident that left him disabled. Medical bills being what they are, by the end of it, we were pretty much broke. If you say that patents last 20 years, well, design patents don't. They last 14, but the courts have historically sided with companies infringing on design patents after 7 years, so long as the infringing company develops their own method to produce whatever design is being used and modifies or changes it. I can't tell you what company it was, but a variation of how the owners didn't know, that answer is pure speculation on my part. However, I got the impression that the owners were in their mid to late 20s and trying to act like investors. The company was on offer relatively cheap from what I know, but had a rather long history in the manufacturing field. This is a perfect case of, we're going to come in because we know everything and just completely gut out the company and without doing your due diligence, and it comes back to bite you. What have you done if you were OP? Pro Army Revenge PAR is par for the course, posted by Sloppy Ice Cream. Dear reader, I had an illustrious 21-year career in the United States Army, USA, which miraculously concluded with an honorable discharge. 21 years and 14 combat deployments produce a lifetime of stories. The overwhelming majority of memories are comical and worth remembering, like the time I borrowed another human's truck, or the time I relocated an artillery display in my barracks room. However, some memories are extra ammunition after a live fire exercise, LFX, worth donating to Chuck and Barry. Memories suppressed so well they never happened. However, these memories can be unintentionally triggered. I worked at the bad place before attending assessment and selection. Working there was the sole reason for attending selection. The Bad Place, TBP, was a 3-star command and nursing home for dying careers. TBP was a mixture of National Guard, Army Reserve, active duty, and Department of Army civilians. It was essentially a foreign planet for a soldier who had grown up in regiment and the 82nd Airborne Division. Overnight, I had transitioned from airborne infantry to the equipment tracking officer. It was my sole purpose in life to source pre-deployment training equipment, or PDTE, for deploying National Guard and Army Reserve units. These units would request specific types of equipment, and it was my responsibility to source at least 2/3 of the requested equipment. I should mention, my boss at TBP was Department of the Army Civilian, DAC. I had 10 years of service under my belt, and it was the first time my direct supervisor was a civilian. Now, I have no issues with civilians, but I do have issues with horrible leadership. Mike was horrible. Mike was a dirty diaper full of crap and always on my butt. Side note, I say that I feel the need to mention TBP recently moved. And you say, moved? Yes, Deep South one day and the Midwest the next. Aliens? Nope, Base Realignment and Closure, BRAC. Wait, what? The Army decided to close some bases and expand others. You reply with, oh, so what's this have to do with the story? OP says, there was 2 active duty soldiers and 2 Department of the Army civilians performing the duties of equipment tracking officers in the Deep South. None of them moved and all continuity was lost. You reply with, okay, there had to be some kind of transition though, right? Yes, all 4 of them spent countless hours informing me how terrible a human Mike was via email. Oh, story time again. Dear reader, I had no earthly idea what my job was or how I was to perform it initially. Making matters worse, I would quickly learn that Mike had no earthly idea either. Mike only knew what Z, final product, looked like and was mentally unaware of the other 26 letters in the alphabet. Mike was less useful than a blinker fluid and football bats. Fear not, dear reader, it only took 3 months of working, from 5 o'clock to 2300 hours, to garner a nascent understanding of my roles and responsibilities. That's 11 p.m. Thankfully, I had wonderful counterparts at sister organizations. Furthermore, they were all equally aware of how useful Mike was. Fast forward 4 months. The section was still composed of exactly one sloppy, or me. I was 25% of the total allotted manpower, performing 100% of the duties. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute, was my battle cry. Life was grand. I had developed standard operating procedures, or SOPs, and automated matrices to assist me. I was even starting to catch errors from the department that validates equipment requests. Do note, remember, it was my duty to source 2/3 of the equipment request. I had a very unpleasant one-way conversation in August of 2011. Captain Richard Cranium was requesting that I provide 3 Rhino buses for training. Dear reader, I kindly explained why fulfilling this request was unfeasible. Problem solved, right? Nope. I then received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cranium. I then received a call from Colonel Richard Cranium. The issue quickly became a self-licking ice cream cone of chaos. Ring, ring, ring. I say, the bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir, ma'am? Caller says, this is Major General Richard Cranium from the California National Guard. Side note, civilian readers, the Major General is the boss jerkhead for all National Guard soldiers in the state of California. Sloppy or me does not get calls from general officers. Ever. How can I help you, sir? He angrily says, I am calling to inquire as to why you will not fulfill our equipment request. Is it not your policy to provide 2/3? Dear reader, I was now a bit agitated. I had clearly explained the issue to the company commander, battalion commander, and brigade commander. I now have an irate God-level commander on the phone, and 2 courses of action are cycling through my mind. I could kindly explain why this request was absurd, or I could go full Regiment Sloppy. Slot machine sloppy. Pulls lever. Wheels are spinning and still spinning. Regiment Sloppy. Sir, I clearly explained to the previous commanders why I cannot fulfill their request and provided other options. I don't want options, Rank Sloppy. I want my 3 Rhino buses. With my time to get fired attitude, I said, Roger, sir. Well, as I told the previous commanders, there are only 5 Rhino buses that exist on Earth. 3 of them are deployed to Iraq, and the other 2 are in Afghanistan. Do you wish for me to forward this equipment request to Forces Command, 4-star General? Cranium says, oh, that won't be necessary, Rank Sloppy. I say, are you sure, sir? I mean, I can. No, did you explain all this to... I explained it to every single one of them, sir. He says, disregard, I have some phone calls to make. Dear reader, the world was right again. At least I thought it was. It appears that the Major General was slow to contact his subordinate leadership. The colonel had contacted Mike demanding that I supply his unit with rhino buses. One would think that a simple explanation would suffice for Mike, but one would be wrong. Common sense is an elusive, fickle creature for Mike. It was like trying to explain what number the letter purple tastes like. Mike says, "Did you tell a unit they can't have a piece of equipment?" I say, "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Well, because there are only 5 of them and they are deployed to combat zones." "Well, you need to figure out how to get them." Is this man frickin' serious? My brain says, laughing, "I think he is." I reply, like, call the Pentagon and ask them to redeploy them from combat because some unit needs to train with them? Mike angrily replies, "It's not your job to validate equipment. It's your job to source it. Do you understand?" With my lip service, I reply, "Roger that, sir." Dear reader, when one door closes, check for an open window. I had over 90 units on my desk and 30,000 pieces of equipment to source for the month of August. It didn't take long to find a window to crawl out of. I found a unique request from an infantry unit. They requested a plethora of equipment and it all made sense, minus 4 pieces of equipment. My brain said, pretty sure those 4 pieces of equipment need to be on a different type of request, right? Yeah, but it's not your job to validate it. Oh, right. Dear reader, I sourced it, all 4 of them. It was not an easy task either. I literally had to scour the entire country for available inventory. I made phone call after phone call to make this request happen. None of the items were collocated. They would need to be transported from the far stretches of the continental United States, and failure was not an option. I had fulfilled my responsibilities. I sourced the equipment and turned it over to Mike for signature. Mike's signature magically allocates funding and authorizes the transportation of said equipment. Dear reader, crap typically rolls downhill. However, this specific request defied the laws of gravity. Crap was going to roll uphill. I crawled back through the window and waited a month for the fallout to ensue. Truth be told, due to my heavy workload, I'd forgotten about my magnificent accomplishment. It was another horrible day at work until I received a magical phone call. Ring, ring, ring. I say, the Bad Place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir, ma'am? Caller says, hello, I am Sergeant First Class Ricky Bobby. I am the Long Range Surveillance Platoon Sergeant for unit name. Hey, Ricky, how can I help you? Well, I am looking at 4 helicopters and I am told I need to sign for them. Me, in yes mode, I say, let me look at your request. Shuffling noises ensue. Oh yes, you requested 2 UH-60L Blackhawk helicopters and 2 UH-47 Chinook helicopters, correct? Yes, but I requested them for SPIES, which is Special Purpose Insertion Extraction System, and FRIES, Fast Rope Insertion Extraction System Training. I'm not a pilot. What the heck am I supposed to do with 4 helicopters? I'm laughing back and say, once you sign for them, they're yours. I suppose you could try to fly them? Him, laughing, replies, frickin' Army, suppose I could. Don't worry, man, I've got your back. I've already coordinated with our aviation validators, and they're going to support your request. I'll give you their number. Ricky Bobby says, I'm ready to copy. It's 8675309. Thanks, man. Call me back if you have any issues, brother. I'll walk upstairs to G3 operations and get this sorted so you boys can do SPIES and FRIES. Wilco, will comply, man. Dear reader, not only does crap roll uphill, but crap rolls uphill faster than I expected. I had just hung up the phone and was departing for lunch. I didn't make it 5 feet before I was beckoned to Mike's office. There are 4 chairs in Mike's office. One with a load-bearing capacity of at least 400 pounds, and 4 normal people chairs. I was awkwardly surprised to find that it was already standing room only. The G4 Colonel, Deputy G4, and G3 Colonels were already in Mike's office. Mike says, it seems we have an issue, Rank Sloppy. My brain's like, we? Really, I'm not aware of any issues, sir. Well, unit name is at Fort Hood, and the battalion commander is wondering why one of his platoon sergeants signed for 4 helicopters? I reply shocked. Did they request 4 helicopters? I can go get the equipment request. I have it right here in my hands. I'm puzzled. I'm like, okay, did they request? Yes, they did. I don't understand. The issue is, the G4 colonel replies, we needlessly ship 4 helicopters across the United States. G3 colonel chimes in. There are already helicopters at Fort Hood. Helicopters and pilots there to support Spies and Fries training. They are there specifically for this type of request. G4 colonel says, Rank Sloppy, did this request not look odd to you? My brain is laughing hysterically, but I actually say, absolutely, sir. The entire room with shocked faces, just baffled as heck. G4 says, then why did you source it? Then I go back and retell the entire Rhino Bus saga. Sir, as I understand it, it's not my job to validate, it's my job to source it. Mike made it very clear on multiple occasions. Mike angrily says, Rank Sloppy, do you realize that you just cost the Army over $100,000 to ship equipment we didn't need to ship? Sir, G3 chimes in, ticked off, no, Mike, you just cost the Army over $100,000. Sir. Mike, it is your signature that authorizes allocation of money and shipping. Did you tell Rank Sloppy it's his job to source, to not validate anything and just only source? Sir, I did, but G4 colonel starts walking out. Mike, let's have a meeting in my office. My brain thinks, oh, that sounds bad. But yeah, Mike, not us. And I say, right, and then retreat to my desk. Side note, I know the G3 colonel. We had worked in the same unit when he was a major. He follows me and sits on my desk. Laughing hysterically says, how in the heck did you do it? I'm like, do what? Find four helicopters. I called everyone. I leveraged my network of contacts and made it my mission. What did your counterpart say about the request? They have the same sentiments towards Mike. G3 shaking his head. Honestly, that's impressive. Sir, I was going to get crap on either way, so I decided, screw Mike. G3 replies, yup, screw Mike, I guess. Dear reader, thank you for reading and listening to my petty Army revenge. I have good news. I no longer worked for Mike after that interaction. Other misdeeds stories came to light after that encounter. I had a long desk-side meeting with the G4 colonel and fully detailed my relationship with Mike. It's nearly impossible to fire Department of the Army civilians, but it was easy to move me. The G3 colonel found a more suitable position for an infantryman. It also sucked, but he gave me ample time to prepare for assessment and selection. I was at TBP for 18 horrible months before I found greener pastures. I could lament on all the horrible things, but it's not worth it. Why? At least I know where to go if I ever need 4 frickin' helicopters. Cheers, Sloppy. Stiff me on overtime? Cue the long, expensive revenge. Posted by Deleted. This happened in the early 2000s when I joined a startup. We agreed on a salary and no paid overtime and an evaluation in 3 months and then annually. Standard stuff mostly. It was a very mediocre salary for the work, but I really liked the work itself, which was extremely interesting and challenging. For me, even if the finances were so-so, I felt I'd learn a lot of skills which would be useful in the future. After 3 years of having 10 decent clients and a bunch of clients trialing and money rolling in, the talk turned to back pay and paid overtime, plus compensating for past overtime. At that point, around $50,000 in overtime had been accrued, which is a lot. Legally, it couldn't be back pay, so the talk was always of a discretionary bonus. Now, at this point, everyone is okay with this, myself included, and this was discussed in writing via the company emails too, so I felt secure and that no bad will was in play. I felt the company should be able to afford the payment, and equally, I'd happily settle for equity at a discount, which is legally possible there, if cash flow was an issue. The discussions about back pay, possible equity, and now started to drag on, and I was getting irked by this. In the end, I was made an offer of equity, which meant the company valuation was far beyond anything reasonable, in the hundreds of millions, and I'd get a minuscule stake, less than 0.01%, of a company with 9 employees and a projected annual turnover of around 2 million. It was a FU of sorts to stiff me out of my money, and I didn't want to take that lying down. To say I was furious was an understatement. Anyway, the day he made that offer, I handed in my resignation. This sent the CTO into panic mode because the CEO had refused an updated contract and I was still on a 1-month notice period. Plus, I had a lot of untaken paid leave. Basically, it meant that I was walking out right then and there. So, off I went that very same day, to the shock and surprise of everyone, I guess. The next day, I sent an official registered letter requesting my overtime and back pay and received a negative response, which I followed up with another detailed demand. This was also rejected because the bonus was discretionary and, quote, there is no overtime. However, I'd been seeking legal advice and I understood that they don't have a leg to stand on if I am willing to pay for an attorney. As the liability in such matters is firmly and 100% on the employer, I was willing. Now you need to understand that going to a lawyer was very rare in those parts back then, so companies didn't generally expect this outcome, and things have since changed. Now when going through the applicable laws with the attorney, I noticed there is a limitation of 7 years. So, while my attorney was laying out what to do in order to get me my money in as little as a few weeks, I just asked him, what if we wait until it's 6 years and 11 months after the transgression and then file demanding interest? I wanted this because the law stated that back pay is due at a 9% APR above the base rate, which was 3.25% at the time. It's accrued daily for every day past the due date. We're looking at around 12 to 12.5% compound daily APR. The risk is that the company folds in that time, but I decided to take that risk. I sent one final letter stating that I expect, and I quote, all the owed and accrued amounts to date, end quote, to be paid immediately. And of course, nothing happened. For the next few years, life rolled on. The company did grow and become a known player in the area. When the time came, I found an attorney and started the case. We had copies of all the communications, copies of the registered letters, and responses. The back pay demanded now, including interest, was $112,000. What I didn't know was that in addition to this, that there are fixed penalties for each instruction to perform uncompensated overtime. The total demand was something like $135,000. To say that the CEO, who was still the CEO, lost his crap would be an understatement. I got a very verbally abusive phone call, which I dutifully recorded as it wasn't completely unexpected, and was added to the filing. The CEO fought, or tried to, but when the judge heard the phone call, he took an immediate dim view. Reading through all the communication just put more nails in the defense's coffin. The judge just ruled and instructed the company to pay immediately and without delay, and also ordered the company to pay all my legal costs. They also got a full audit from the Department of Labor. The company paid up a week later. To add insult to injury, the evening of the court's decision, the CEO apparently got very drunk and crashed his car into another vehicle while drunk. He got a DUI conviction and lost his driving license for half a year, and his insurance refused to pay out for the damages to his vehicle, which is a brand new Mercedes S-Class, as he was drunk. All in all, a glorious day. Terrorize my family, enjoy losing everything and going back to jail. Posted by Raditz Fan 9000. Myself and my wife had just had our second child and moved into a duplex in an amazing neighborhood, had its own playground even. We moved in and greeted the neighbors, bunch of younger people, but they seemed okay. The first day after moving in, we find that they're gone and they've left their 7-year-old on a school day outside of our door with a bag of goldfish and a note asking us to watch him while they went out. QCPS call number 1. The neighbors and me got along really well. The old guy next door repaired bikes for a hobby, and the next door neighbor did woodworking and would always come over to see the kids and send his grandkids over to play too. They warned us that our upstairs neighbors were trouble. Constant traffic going in and out, and parties every single night. This was 110% the truth. It got to the point we couldn't sleep at night, and we had multiple altercations to the point that it was full-blown yelling matches. The landlord was useless, and he would do nothing to get rid of them, so I bided my time, and eventually, one night they came home in their red Mazda 3, and it was destroyed. They must have hit someone and ran. So I called the RCMP to let them know, at least the very least I figured they'd get in deep crap, but oh man, I had no idea what had just unleashed. Turns out the D-bag had a warrant out for his arrest for drug trafficking. He got hauled away in cuffs that night, and there's entitled woman 2 got a visit from CPS again as they left their son home alone again, and this wasn't once or twice, it was every single day. So, my wife went digging for names and found the mother on Facebook. Using public record searches, we found out that they owed easy their home nearly $48K in assets as they'd taken off from the original address with all their furniture, including TVs and a huge sound system. 48 hours later, the sheriff was there with a box truck emptying their house. Took the beds, couches, TVs, the annoying subwoofer system, kitchen set, and even the dressers. CPS came shortly after and removed the child from the house. No, look, I didn't enjoy seeing him taken away, but they never fed him, and he was always in the same clothing, and it was falling apart. I mean, we even went out of our way to make sure that he had full meals when we couldn't let this kid starve. The D-bag went to jail for drug possession. He was out on bail, and he hid the drugs in a dresser they took. Entitled Woman 1 went to jail for assaulting the sheriff, and Entitled Woman 2 actually had a happy ending. As far as I know, after she lost her son, she went through multiple programs to clean herself up and started working to provide for her son. I ran into her a couple years ago, and she thanked me for what I did. I got pro-revenge on the drug dealer and his girlfriend, and thankfully helped someone get on the right path. I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there, posted by Reddit admin Dumb87. To give you some background on my friend Tim, made up name, he's been programming since he was like 7 years old. Tim said by the time that he got to college, he breezed through most of his comp sci classes because a lot of the content they were covering he'd already mastered years prior. Tim is an excellent programmer. Tim's career has been quite successful. He's worked for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and finally a hedge fund. The story starts at the hedge fund. Tim works with a lot of AI technology, and at this hedge fund, he was the lead programmer manager who spearheaded an effort to optimize their AI that helped them complete literally millions of trades a day. To say his work had a massive impact was an understatement. All of this going on with COVID-19 in the background, and due to the pandemic, they went to a work-from-home model, where my friend Tim kept working. During the work from home, Tim was looking around his fancy $4,500 NYC apartment and wished for things like a yard, heated pool, a nice 3-car garage, and not living in a high-rise. It dawned on Tim that he could leave New York City. Tim moves to Michigan. So Tim moved back to his hometown in Michigan, where he bought himself a really nice home with a heated pool, a 3-car garage, a nice yard, and guess what the yard had in it? A mother-in-law suite, which was essentially a 2-bedroom, 1-bath second home on the property of his main home, which he turned into his man cave. It's actually pretty sick. Oh yeah, and his mortgage payment was far less than his $4,500 month rent, like half. Tim spent the rest of his pandemic work from home pounding out projects and so on. He never actually informed his employer on an official basis that he'd moved. He just kept working. Then the pandemic ended. The pandemic is finally over, back to the office, or... Tim's boss, Larry, calls him up and goes, "All right, Tim, on Monday we're starting work back at the office." And Tim goes, yeah, about that. I moved to Michigan." Larry is shocked and goes, "You didn't even ask if you could do that?" And Tim basically said, "Well, I didn't know I needed your permission to move," in a sarcastic as heck way. Larry insists that Tim needs to move back to NYC or he won't have a place on the team. Tim says he's been doing the exact same work from home at a high level for the past year. He's willing to travel to New York City for a few meetings a year on his own dime, but he feels that his quality of life is so much higher outside of New York City, and he has no desire to live in NYC. To which Larry said, if Tim doesn't have any desire to live in NYC, then he has no desire to keep Tim employed. Now, dear Reddit, what do you think a talented senior programmer with over a decade of experience who specializes in AI technology is going to say to a response like that? If you're thinking that he quit, you'd be absolutely right, he quit. Maintaining complex code can be hard. Now, anyone that has done any programming knows that sometimes the best person to maintain that code is the person who wrote the code. There's logic, there's thought processes, there's just so much that goes into programming that can be so individualistic that it can be hard for someone to take over a code base that they didn't write. John, CEO, enters the picture. 6 weeks goes by when John calls Tim. John is the CEO of the hedge fund. John gets Tim to agree to consider coming back, so that's when John suggests that they fly Tim to NYC and he sits down with John. Tim, however, flipped the switch and said, no, how about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss this? Tim said that he said that because he wanted to establish that if he was going to come back, it was going to be him working from Michigan, and if he was going to talk to his employment, it was going to be done in Michigan. John agreed, and 2 days later flew out to meet with Tim. So Tim sits down and John says that they really need him because he provided a lot of value to the organization, and the programming team, they're struggling. John offers Tim the opportunity to come back with a 20% pay cut since he won't be living in NYC, and John called that a cost of living adjustment. To which Tim said, no, I want a 15% raise above what I was earning. John sits back and responds, the reason we pay what we pay is because we ask you to live in New York City, and we understand that's an expensive city to live in. To which Tim says, hey, you pay what you pay, and you pay it because I'm worth it. If I wasn't worth paying what you pay, you wouldn't be paying me. Now, my first condition is, if you want me back, it will be a 15% raise. John goes, and second? The second condition is, I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there. John sighs, oh, you're asking for too much. To which Tim goes, you don't need to bring me back if you don't want to. I'll be fine elsewhere. John goes, I'll talk to the partners. And Tim says, my offer is good till Friday. John goes, what do you mean? And Tim says, next Monday is when I'm going to start looking for work. This offer is good until Friday. And it was Tuesday. And then John leaves. That Thursday, the phone rings, and it's John. In conclusion, Tim, we are transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be working with you anymore, and we're fine with giving you a 15% raise. Can we send you an offer letter for you to sign? Tim says, of course, and Larry is really gone? John goes, yes, you'll never need to interact with Larry ever again. That was at the start of this year. Tim hasn't been in New York City, hasn't heard from Larry, and hasn't seen Larry on any communications, and so on. Ruined my boss's entire life because he screwed me like this. Click the video on your screen, you gotta see the fallout of this one, and I'll see you there.